Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm going to jump right in. We're going to talk this morning about 21st century brain-savvy leadership. Hopefully you read the description where there's lots of numbers there about your brain. So I want to invite you to think differently about your brain. I want to give you the welcome mat to step up and start thinking about how to control your brain better, how to make your brain smarter, how to not believe your brain. That freed me a long time ago, that I don't have to believe what my brain tells me. So here's what I'd like for you to do. Turn to the person on your right or your left, in front of you or behind you. Introduce yourself if you haven't done that already, and tell them what you know about the brain. Do that real quickly. I'm going to give you a minute. Go. Here we go. I want you to think about your brain. Do you see your brain as a race car, or do you see your brain as a bicycle? Choice, race car or bicycle. Turn to your neighbor on your right or your left, behind you or in front of you, and tell them which one and why. Do that now. Give you another minute. How many of you see your brain as a race car? Raise your hands for me. Okay. How many of you see your brain as a bicycle? Raise your hands for me. How many of you, your brain's not operating this morning? Race car, thinking fast. We think that it's intuitive. We have a gut reaction way of thinking and making our decisions. Sound familiar? First impressions. It's often why we jump to conclusions. Could be right, could be wrong. Thinking slow, analytical, critical, thinking way of making decisions. See the difference? Reflection, problem solving, and analysis. One of these ways is not like the other. One of these ways actually damages your brain. Let me ask you this. How many of you drive home or take public transportation the same way every day? Raise your hand for me. We do rote. When you do rote thinking, when you go into doing something the same way all the time, the brain stops thinking. The brain goes into automation. The brain says, I know what to do here. You don't have to think anymore. The last office I worked in was 14 miles from my home in Dallas, Texas. I would have to drive up 75 in the morning, 14 miles. Didn't take me 20 minutes. In the afternoon, anytime after 3 p.m., it took me an hour and a half to get home. I would pull into my driveway, driving home, pull out the keys and go, crap, I don't remember driving home. You ever done that? That's not good. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the rest of us driving while you're driving. And we think to ourselves, well, I can listen to a book on tape. I can do work. I can reflect on the day. And you're not present in the moment. You do rote. Dr. Sandra Bond Chapman from the University of Texas in Dallas from the Center for Brain Health and the Brain Performance Institute has found, her and her research team, the more rote thinking you do, the more toxicity you build up in your brain. And the more you're going to have early Alzheimer's and early dementia. Because we don't see our brain as a muscle to exercise. And we avoid thinking. So thinking fast is often our automated and our emotional brain, which is back here. When our emotional center controls, we cannot think clearly. You cannot operate out of the limbic system and the amygdala at the same time as you operate out of the executive functions of your brain. It's one or the other. And when you're operating out of the emotional center of your brain, it shuts down logical thinking. Ouch. When our slow thinking brain controls, we dampen our emotional centers and think clearly. So the challenge is, how do we help ourselves not operate out of emotional center of our brain all the time, and not operate out of rote, instead operate out of the decision-making, the frontal lobes, where we do exercise our brain and do it more often. And this is the quote from Dr. Sandra Bond Chapman. She has a book out called Make Your Brain Smarter. Go get that book. It's a brilliant book. Tip 1, here you go. You are in charge of your brain. I'm not. You are. Simple. You don't have to be a victim of your brain. You don't have to be held hostage against your will because of your brain. And you don't have to be an emotional wreck or feel like you're going out of your mind. Here's what else Dr. Sandra Bond Chapman and her research team has found, the more you operate out of the executive functions, the frontal lobes, where you do decision-making, reflection, synthesis, analysis, the more you can improve into mental health issues you might have. That actually operating out of this part of the brain improves bipolarism. It improves depression. And the reason we don't like to operate out of this part of the brain because it takes energy. Thinking requires work. Tip number 2, understanding what drives your brain performance can benefit your life, your work, your relationships, your business productivity, your business growth. Tip 1, you're in charge of your brain. Tip number 2, understanding what drives your brain performance can benefit life, work, and relationships. So, think of your brain as just kind of a mess sometimes, where we just react. And it gets a little concerning. Have you ever had a customer send you that email, and you immediately go, send, and you walk to one of your colleagues and you tell them about it? Guess what part of the brain you probably operated out of? The limbic system. The amygdala. It's the lizard brain, it's the prehistoric brain, it's the cave brain that did not evolve with this part of the brain. And it's the part of the brain that causes us challenges. So we have to learn how to control the amygdala. Here's how I remember how to spell amygdala. Amy G. Dalla. I call it Amy for short. Amy's neither male nor female, but I had to learn that you can control Amy. And in order for me not to feel like this, when something happens, when my spouse pushes my buttons and goes there and floods my body with cortisol and adrenaline, and for 40 minutes, I cannot think straight. Did you hear that? When you're operating out of the emotional part of your brain, when somebody pushes your buttons and you start to get wet palms, you start sweating, your face turns red, my ears turn red. My ears turn bright red when Amy takes over. So anybody who's around me goes, oh, Jeff, we need to back off. Amy's in charge. We're going to give you an hour. We'll come back. Because literally for 40 minutes, you cannot operate here. That's kind of scary for some of us. You actually should be quarantined for 40 minutes. You should not deal with another person. So the challenge is, how do we get out of the fences that we build around ourselves? How do we see the world a little bit differently? How do we not operate in old mental models? Because that's rote. That's how we respond. And many of us respond in your day-to-day doings with doing the Industrial Revolution model of what you've always done. We immediately go to where you've always been and what you've always done. And change concerns us. Here's the thing. The more you change, the older you get, the healthier your brain becomes. But what happens is we begin to avoid change because it's unfamiliar. And we see unfamiliar as unsafe. We need to shift our thinking that unfamiliar actually is an opportunity to learn. My mother is 81 years old, and she's always said to me, when you stop learning, you become old. When you stop learning, you actually die. The research from Dr. Sandra Bond Chapman at the University of Texas Center for Brain Health has found, when you are bored, you actually have a dead brain. Boredom equals the same thing as brain death. Ouch. So how do we change and not do what everybody else does, which is avoid being different? You have to think about your toolbox. What mental tools do you have in your toolbox that you can use? What will keep you running towards the goals that you have set for yourselves? One of those tools is reflection. Let me ask you this question. How often do you dedicate time on your to-do lists to do nothing but think? Seriously. Every day, how often do you give yourself 30 minutes to reflect, to ponder, to daydream, to question? We don't do it. You know why we don't do it? Because there's nothing productive that comes out of it. We think we need to be doing something. And that's part of our challenges, is in a world, we feel like if we're doing something, at least we're moving forward, when in actuality, we may be the hamster on the wheel going nowhere. It's all about the balance. And if you would just dedicate twice a week, 30 minutes, to putting everything down and thinking and reflecting and letting the mind wander, you actually create healthy brains. Think about this. If you have kids, your kids are going to live to 110, 115, 120, and we can replace everything in their body but their brains. I don't want to live 80, 90, 100 and have a bad brain. My father has had 5 strokes and dementia has set in. And I look at him and what I know about the brain, so I'm constantly asking questions. And whenever we can get him to think back and the brain kicks in, we run with it as fast as we can. Because the last thing I want to have happen to me is have all my bodies being replaced, but my brain and not enjoying life. So I challenge myself, and I invite you in the next few days to think about doing something different. As you are here, find somebody who's not like you and talk to them. Don't go to just people who are like you. Find somebody who seems the opposite of you. Go ask some questions. Go try some new food. Try something different. Don't get stuck in this habit. I'm not trying that. That sounds terrible. Try it. Go explore differently. Don't follow the pack to the same sessions. Take a different route. Take a different path. If everybody's going over here, go over here. Do something different. So the choice lies in your hands. And what was very interesting for me is to learn several years ago that I didn't have to believe my brain. Your brain doesn't know real from fake. Have you ever woke up in the middle of the morning, middle of the night, 2 or 3 a.m., and you've heard something in the house, or your condo, your apartment? At my house, when that happens, my spouse and I look at our dogs. If our dogs have not responded, it's nothing. If our dogs are whining, we look at each other, and to diffuse Amy, because we've been hijacked by Amy at that point, we do rock, paper, scissors to see who's going to go check. Now, I live in Dallas, Texas, as you heard. Most Texans would lean over to the bedside table, pull out the drawer, pull out a gun. I don't allow guns in my house because one of us would accidentally shoot one another, or we'd be screaming, "Where'd you put the bullets? I don't remember where the bullets are." So we reach for a bat or one of our lamps. Who gets to go look? 9 times out of 10, it's nothing. My house is creaking, the foundation has been moving, there's a tree limb on the house, it's nothing. But my brain is convinced there's an intruder. Your brain doesn't know real from fake. You can think differently. You can balance yourselves. And you can learn that when you wake up in the middle of the night and you hear that sound, Amy, stop it. Amygdala, back off. But you have to visualize yourself thinking differently. That when you hear that sound, you don't operate in emotions. Now, there's a reason why Amy has preference. There's a reason why Amy looks at everything that comes into your body through your 5 senses and thinks about the various components of this and responds based on Amy's perception if it's a threat. It's to save you. So we do need that there, but we have a prehistoric brain for 21st century. We have to learn how, as the yellow Nikes walked out on stage, how to think and run differently for the 21st century and to control our brain. So I invite you in the next couple of days to break away from the pack. Take some time and go sit down for 15 or 20 minutes and think about what you've been learning here. Reflect on it. Think about what's happening and how you can use it. And I invite you at the end of the day to roll the day up. Before you go to sleep, think back on your day and what are 3 things that you want to recall from the day. 3 things. I'm giving you something very tactical, but something very practical that will work for you. 3 things. Roll it up. Then do it again the next day, and then compare the 3 things to each other. And which of those 6 do you want to remember at the end of the week? All about 21st century leadership. And let me just give you a real quick quiz. Let's do this. Think yes or no to the answers to this. I'm a great problem solver and doer and act quickly. Yes or no? Think of your answer. Keep how many yeses and nos you got. I rarely pause long enough to think about what I'm thinking about. I seldom carve time daily to simply think. I often shoot from the hip without thinking. I easily let my emotions control my responses. Yes or no? Sometimes I can't concentrate because I'm so angry about something that's happened. I tend to be fire aim rather than ready or aim fire. If you answered yes to 2 or more of those questions, it's time for you to have a frontal lobe overhaul. Come to my next session. I'll be speaking at the breakout later today. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Let's welcome Josh back.